We're going to hear about building 21st century skills to liberate the future from our dear colleagues who both have very strong Bridges connections, but also are deeply, deeply involved in the work of the Club of Rome. So the first question I'd like to ask, actually, would be to Mamphela Ramphele. And the Club of Rome has been a think tank of note when it comes to the issue of building an awareness and action of the material limitations to growth. This is something that impacts present and future generations, obviously. During your tenure as co-president of the Club of Rome, you decided one of the impact hubs, or you dedicated one of the impact hubs to youth leadership and intergenerational dialogues. What was the vision behind this?
Thank you very much, Stephen. I think Stan has just given you the vision, that these are the people who will be there long before I'm gone. But I also come from a continent with the largest gap between the median age of the leaders at 63 and the median age of the population. It just doesn't make sense, whether it's scientific, from a scientific point of view or a values-based view. And so what we did with Sandrine, Carlos, and others is to normalize the recognition of young people as not just the future, they're the present. So I also want to refer back to what Stan said about this structural feeling that we are learning new ways of doing. Excuse me, think about it. A segment of the global population, which constitutes 6% only of who we are as human beings, are taking care effectively of more than 80% of the sensitive and essential ecosystems. So these structural fields have always been there. We have to re-embrace what it means to be human, to live within the cycle of life where everything is connected to everything else. So indigenous people who are hounded out of, whether it's the Congo or the Amazon, are still acting with the future in mind. And so our job is to learn from that 6%. And that's why we did it.
Thank you very much, Mamphela, and now Nolita. I was hoping that you might give us a sense from your understanding what must be considered by states when it comes to enabling youth and intergenerational leadership for positive, desirable futures.
Firstly, thank you, Stephen, as our convener today, and thank you to all the people who made it possible for us to be here. At its core, it's about implementing participatory mechanisms, which is one of the things Derek and their protocol speaks a lot about. That is what is crucial for ensuring global equity on a healthy planet today, as the doctor said, and for future generations. But participation is not only about voices. It invites leadership from all spheres of society, particularly younger people who represent 70% of my home continent. When I first met Dr. Ramphele, I told her about my concerns and my vision for the future, and she paused and she said, well, what are you going to do about it? It's time to rise to the level of your ambition. And so today I offer an example of how to build the capacity within young people so that they can rise to that level of their ambition and demand better of their countries and demand meaningful engagement so that they can liberate their future. I'm not sure how many of us are aware of this, but 52% of all people are under the age of 30. And so in 2021, the Club of Rome and Penn State University supported the creation of the 50%, which is an international youth engagement platform that has since reached over 2,000 young people in over 35 countries and founded during the pandemic, so most of it was online. And through our partners, we're now building a network of networks that has the capability to reach over 500,000 young people across the world. And our focus is simple. It is to empower generations to be curious, innovative, and embody an ethic of constructive resistance by inviting youth across the world to ask themselves, how do systems change? And what does that have to do with me? Despite extensive knowledge of global systemic challenges, little learning has led to meaningful systemic change. And as Kim Stanley Robinson said, we're in a season where we have to learn how to change pretty quickly and pretty significantly. And this little learning for change consequently results in that we struggle to teach others how to transform and catalyze transformation in societies. What we have learned through the 50% is that most of us have an acute awareness of the world around us, but we do not know what to do about these issues. And this is not only true for young people, this is true for most people. I mean, we're in New York to talk about what to do about these issues. As a result, we have not built processes to systemically include younger generations and marginalized people, indigenous communities, into the work of building their future. We're at the outskirts of society. And we see this clearly through examples of like high unemployment rate, which again is another characteristic of my home. Systemic exclusion from building a better future. The 50% encourages young people to embrace a systemic worldview because it empowers leaders to understand themselves as part of a whole, yet masters of their fate at the same time. We've hosted dozens of intergenerational dialogues with leading experts and members of the Club of Rome to provide an alternative education about global issues. We've built skills programs and recently partnered with the University of Toronto on a course on storytelling for global youth leadership. We're building a cohort of young people with the skills that are needed for the 21st century. And to anyone who's interested to join us on this journey, as the 50%, we say, how can we help? We invite you to join us in building a youth guide to systems change. And we've convened young people from over a dozen countries to meet every 2 weeks to build an in-depth understanding of the issues of climate change, political leadership, and sustainable business, and develop the learning tools not only for themselves, but also for their communities, asking themselves, how can we thrive? Or, as another great South African said, how do we make room for the beautiful things? Thank you.
I'd like to follow up with one last question to both of you. Well, to a certain extent, the Declaration on Future Generations is about what we learn, what we choose to learn, and what we want this learning to inspire. How can we transform teaching, learning, and the practice of science in a way that acknowledges ancient cultural wisdom and intergenerational wisdom and capacity? So I'd like to begin maybe first with Mamphela and then or with Nolita and then give Mamphela the final word.
Thank you. So for the 50%, our understanding is that a foundational education is vital. This is how we currently pass on knowledge from one generation to another. In an interconnected and a complex world, the knowledge of science, chemistry, geology, biology, the humanities, and social sciences is important. In a Club of Rome report called No Limits to Learning, they call this type of learning maintenance learning, which means learning from the past to maintain what we know right now. It's fundamental for humanity. But there's probably room to challenge this and speak about modalities of learning, and I'll leave that for the doctor because she knows more about how to teach than I do. On the other hand, what we call 21st century skills is learning that looks to the future, that embraces the complexity of our environments and societies to create an ecology and a political environment that is built for us to thrive. This innovative learning requires that we look to challenge norms and power. And by power, I mean the mechanisms that we use to maintain the current. Because power reflects on our beliefs and our norms that we use to build our institutions. The same beliefs and norms that have resulted in the systemic exclusion of young people. At its worst, power limits our ability to imagine change and imagine what change could look like. So for the future we want, and for the Africa we want, at the 50%, we complement our education with innovative learning. So we can embrace an ethos of constructive resistance, as I said earlier, and learn to liberate the future, rising to the level of that ambition. Thank you.
Thank you. Mamphela, please.
Thank you very much. You can see why the Club of Rome decided on the 50%. I mean, this is evidence in your presence of what is possible when we look at creating spaces for young people to rise to their level of ambition and their wonderful creativity. So I'm a very proud person sitting here today. But I want to emphasize one important thing. Whenever people talk about the ancient, they talk about knowledge and tradition. There is a wrong view that science is modern. We all are descendants of African ancients who practice science the way we should go back to, where there wasn't physical science, medical science. Science is integrated, transdisciplinary, but infused with values. So you don't have to go and get a psychologist to teach you about values. It's built into the way you teach, the way you learn, and the way you do research, and the way you serve your people. And so my additional point with regard to what should we do to make this future emerge, let us fundamentally transform our education system, which is built on the Industrial Revolution. That's why I can talk about discounted value. Really now? There is no discounted value when it comes to human beings within the cycle of life. Everything matters. So let's embrace ancient science, because within it is embedded the philosophy of life, the vision, the values that will help us walk that tightrope, even as people are dancing around us. Because we will know that we cannot do differently if we acknowledge our humanity. So my final point is, every one of us should leave this room to become an enabler of us to go back to what it means to be human, so we can embrace a new way of thinking, doing, and living science. Science which is values infused. Isn't it wonderful? We don't have to wait for the future. The future is here. Thank you.
My deep thanks to Mamphela and Nolita for some very inspiring examples and thoughts